In this video, I'm going to talk about intelligence tests. And what an intelligence test is a method of assessing your mental aptitudes and comparing you to others using a numerical score. So intelligence tests are broken into two formats. One is an aptitude test, like the SATs, and these are meant to predict your future performance, your ability to learn going forward. And that is supposed to be different from achievement tests. Achievement tests are supposed to measure what you've already learned. So in this class, the tests you take are achievement tests. Have you actually learned the material? And the first intelligence test was created by Theodore Simon and Alfred Binet in France. And Simon and Binet were asked to create a test. The score you got on their intelligence test was called your mental age. The mental age is your chronological age typical for a given level of performance. That means if you scored an 8 on their test, you have the mental age of an 8-year-old. You're as smart as the average 8-year-old. If your mental age is that of a 20-year-old, you're as smart as the average 20-year-old. The reason that France wanted them to create this test is that France decided to have universal free public education versus having people pay for it. And so all of a sudden they were going to have all these kids flooding into their school system, and they wanted to be able to figure out who was going to need extra help. They couldn't just put all the 6-year-olds together and all the 10-year-olds together, because not all 10-year-olds were going to be equal. Some were going to have intellectual disabilities that needed to be addressed. Some, it will have been their first day of school, whereas others would have been in school for a few years already. And so by creating classrooms based on mental age versus chronological or actual age, they could have everyone together who was on the same footing intellectually. So they created this test to help France divide up their kids, and it revolutionized the intelligence community. Everyone wanted this test, including the Americans. And so what they did was they translated the test into English and gave it to a bunch of American kids, and lo and behold, they all bombed it. And the reason for that was that intelligence can be culturally based as well. What it means to be smart in France, the kind of stuff you need to know to have a high mental age in France, is not necessarily the same thing you need to have a high mental age here in the US. And so they couldn't just translate the test, they had to culturally adapt the test. And the person who made the American version of it was a guy named Lewis Terman, and he was working at Stanford University. And so because he was at Stanford and because Simon and Binet were the first people to create it, the name for this test is called the Stanford-Binet. So the American version of the original intelligence test is the Stanford-Binet. It's the most widely used American version, still in use today, although it's in a revised edition at this point. So even though it was Terman that created it, it's called Stanford-Binet. Chances are, if you have taken an intelligence test, it's this one. Now, you will notice that I have not said the phrase IQ yet. Binet and Simon and Terman did not create IQ. That was a German dude. IQ stands for intelligence quotient. And what intelligence quotient is, it's basically a formula, and you should know this formula. It was created by a guy named Stern, Wilhelm Stern in Germany. It is your mental age divided by your chronological age times 100. So if you are as smart as the average 10-year-old, and lo and behold, you are 10, your chronological age, your IQ is going to be 100. 100 is the average. You are as smart as you are supposed to be, no more, no less. If If you are 10 years old, but you're only as smart as a 5-year-old, so you have the mental age of a 5-year-old, but you're 10, your IQ is going to be 50. Anything below 100 means you are less smart than your peers. Conversely, if you are only 10 years old, but you're as smart as the average 15-year-old, then your IQ is going to be 150. You are hitting genius range almost. So high IQs, you are smarter than average, higher intelligence. Low IQs, you are less smart than the average person. Now, just a little disclaimer, they don't actually use this specific equation now. They have screwed with it a lot since then. So this was the original way that they calculated IQ. Now it's a more complex equation, so that they could keep the average at 100. If you are going to have a good intelligence test, there's 3 things that you really need to look for. And I'm going to clear this away so I have room to discuss them. 1, you need it to be standardized. This means that you have uniform testing procedures. Everyone is taking it the same way. You have meaningful scores. It's compared to a testing group. If you're taking the SATs, which is an intelligence test basically, everyone takes it the same way. Everyone has the same time. It's the same format. You get the calculator, you don't get the calculator. Everything is even. It's why in this class, everyone has the same time limit. Everyone gets the same materials beforehand. Even though this is more of an achievement test, it's standardized. One of the other things you need is you need it to be reliable. You need reliability, and you also need validity. You need to be able to tell reliability and validity apart. If a test is reliable, it means that you get consistent results. If you took the test today and you took the test tomorrow, you're gonna get the same score. Validity is when the test measures what it's supposed to. So if it is measuring your ability, it's actually measuring your ability. So my favorite example I use all the time is using shoe size to measure intelligence. If I use your shoe size to measure intelligence, and since I have tiny feet, we're going to make it a negative correlation. The smaller your feet are, the smarter you are. Is that a standardized test? Yes, everyone gets their feet measured the same way. Awesome. Is it a reliable test? Yes, it is very reliable. If I measure your foot size today using a standardized practice and I measure it tomorrow, I'm going to get the same score. That is very consistent results. It is a very reliable intelligence test. However, is it valid? Does it measure what it's supposed to? No, your shoe size is in no way connected to your intelligence. So even though it is standardized, even though it is reliable, it is not valid, and thus it is not a good intelligence test. You need all 3 of these things present for it to be a good intelligence test. And so that's one big complaint with a lot of intelligence tests is, are they reliable? Are they valid? Are they standardized? How are they created? This is a big issue with the nature-nurture debate for intelligence, because we often use intelligence tests to measure how smart you are, and how much of that is based on your environment, how much of that is based on the test you take, how much of that is based on your genes. So when we talk about this nature-nurture aspect, you have your environment that plays a part, and then you also have your genetics. Overall, genes play a bigger role, especially as you age. And the way we know this is using adoption studies. So they look at the intelligence scores for adopted kids, comparing them to their biological parents or siblings and their adoptive parents and siblings. The older they are, the more similar their scores are to their biological parents rather than their adoptive parents. So genetics does play a part. However, it's not the 100% factor. It's not 100% genetics. The way I like to think of it is that your genes give you a potential spectrum for intelligence, and your environment helps to determine where on that spectrum you're going to fall. So if you have an enriched environment, if you have a good environment, you're going to reach your fullest genetic potential. If you do not have that enriched environment, you are going to be lower on the intelligence scale. There's also some group differences. Men on average have a wider variety of scores on intelligence tests. That means you are more likely to see men in the genius range, but you are also more likely to see men with intellectual disability. Women are more likely, as a group, to fall in the middle. So that doesn't mean one guy is going to test in a wider variety of scores throughout his lifetime. This is all men as a group, comparing them. They have a wider variety. Women are less likely to fall into the genius category, but they're also less likely to fall into the intellectual disability category. Men tend to be better at spatial ability, like rotating objects in their minds. Women are better at memory for objects and their location. You also see differences that can be caused by stereotype threat. So a stereotype threat, what that is. This is when the self-confirming concern that you'll be judged based on a negative stereotype. So there's a couple of examples of this. One would be they did a research project where they took a football team and they divided it in half. And half of them were told you're taking an intelligence test that determines athletic ability. So people who are athletes tend to do better on this. The other half of the football team, given the exact same test, but told this is an intelligence test based on intellectual ability. Just a heads up, athletes tend to not do so well. And lo and behold, what happened? The group that thought they were being tested on something they were good at did awesome. The group that thought, oh, we're just dumb jocks, we're not supposed to do well, bombed it. Same test, same football team, different results because of the stereotype threat. This explains why, even though there is no genetic basis for women being worse at math, as you go through school, girls do worse in math. It's that negative stereotype that girls are not supposed to be as good. This is one factor, in addition to racism and who creates intelligence tests, especially the older ones, why African American kids tend to score lower. There is this idea, this negative stereotype in the US that if you're black, you're not going to succeed as much. And these kids are raised hearing that stereotype, knowing that stereotype, and thus it affects how well they do. Another component of that, again, is how the tests are created and the bias inherent in the test. Culture fair tests try to take that out, and when you give people culture fair tests, it does decrease the amount of difference you do see in the scores. But stereotype threat does play a significant part as well.